maybe ask again was like, do you cultivate royal jelly, or do you like? It seems like the way that you described it, it'd be something that would like kind of like perhaps be damaging the hive a lot potentially.
Yeah, I don't specifically know. Mm-hmm. You mean cultivate as far as remove it from the hive to be able to offer it for sale?
Yeah. Because I've noticed that as a product sometimes. And
I think I've seen that. I've wondered how they do that, or how they get enough to be able to commercially sell it.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty there is that they're going to create royal jelly in the absence of a queen. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to do that, you would either need to remove the queen, and which would tell them, okay, now we need to start. And typically what will happen is when they're building a super procedure cell or trying to build for new queen, they'll do a number of them. Mm-hmm. So they'll be anywhere from 5, I've seen as many as 10, 12 in a hive when they're replacing the queen. So I suppose in that situation, you could remove all but 1 or 2 and then be able to remove the jelly from that.
But multiple hives too, or something.
Yeah, and you could. If you had 100 hives, you remove the queen from each hive. They started building cells. Say they got anywhere from 3 to 7, and you left 2. You could remove it from the others. My feeling, it seems like it'd be really hard on the colony. You're really disrupting the natural order. You're going in. You're taking a healthy queen and removing her for the purpose of cultivating the jelly.
Do you think it would be best to then just put also potentially the queen back in, or would that process of making the royal jelly be too long that the queen would die?
No, you would need to, if you were going to do something like that, you need to put the queen into a breeding hive. Mm-hmm. She would need to be tended to by other nurse bees or worker bees. As far as putting her back in, if you were to remove all of the new queen development cells, then they would still have the need for a queen. My experience has said that once a queen is removed, or say once a hive wants to swarm, you can remove the swarm cells to try and keep them from swarming. But it seems like once they have that mentality, they're going down that road. So I think that if you were going to do something like that, you would almost be dedicating a hive for that purpose. And I don't know that hive would ever thrive.
Yeah.
So
I imagine, I don't know this, but I imagine the royal jelly people that harvest that, they also have to be queen rearing pretty extensively, right?
I would think so.
It's got to be hand in hand, right?
Yeah, and that's where there's a lot of controversy around those different methods, because they do a lot of artificial insemination of queens, where they're, rather than, I was lucky enough this last year, I was tending some hives, and I heard what I thought was a bumblebee, so kind of a louder, buzz,
right.
And I looked down, and it was a virgin queen starting that mating flight with a drone, so they were both together making a ton of noise, and so and they were right about eye level, and I just walked out in the field to watch that. And that's the natural process of that taking place. When they inseminate queens, what they do is they knock them out, and then they use a microscope, and they use sperm from drones, and and so they're going through, and they're doing hundreds in a day.
Whoa, that's crazy.
So you can see where that would cause some controversy with quite a few people.
Yeah.
I fall on the side that I think some of that is necessary, especially the state that honeybees are in, to be able to propagate. As far as harvesting royal jelly, another question that came up we didn't have time to address was the harvesting of pollen. They have these pollen traps, and essentially it's just something that foraging bees walk through, and it pulls the pollen out of their pollen sacs as they're going into the hive. And then that's collected, and then it's sold. I've heard a couple different opinions. One is that they collect enough. They'll collect pollen as much as they need for a few days eating. So, if you put a pollen trap on, you leave it there for a month, you're going to be harming the hive. I've heard some people say you put it on for a couple hours a day, and you're fine, or a day or two at a time, and you're fine. So, not something, either the harvesting of the royal jelly or harvesting of pollen is not something that Liddell's honey has ever gotten into. You know, and I suppose that if you look at all the different ways to keep bees and all the kind of call them advances or different techniques and methods, if that's what you do, that's what you get good at, and that's what you find a way to make it work.
Yeah, it seems like, it's just like practicing methods, and if you can, I guess. But
and then the other thing is the honeybees is that every time, let's say you're harvesting royal jelly, it's not going to be economically viable to kill off a hive for, a couple dozen cells worth of royal jelly. So they've obviously, the people who are doing that have obviously developed a method to do it and then continue to propagate the hive. I would just say it's probably not the same kind of set course that they would be in nature. So
right. What other questions maybe that you wish you could get finish answering in that time? I noticed that definitely it was like we were running out of time, and it was just like
and honestly
really
we didn't cover like a third of the stuff that I was hoping. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to share with people today is that we can all be beekeepers. I mean, it's not hard to get into. There's some financial investment to get into it, but you can you can easily build your own hive out of, you look at top bar hives, they're really pretty simple. Most people can go to a construction site and get the stuff they're going to haul off and burn, or go to a thrift shop or a Habitat for Humanity and buy enough materials to build a hive. And then you can wait for a swarm. You can capture a swarm. There are inexpensive ways to do it. It's not difficult. I constantly we're talking to people and say, I want to do it. I've always wanted to, but I think I want to wait until I know enough so that I can do it. And it doesn't matter if you've studied for 10 days or 10 years. Bees are going to die, and bees are going to be successful. And
it's a learning process.
Yeah, I'm a third generation beekeeper, and we had I'm not going to tell you how many, but we had a bunch of hives die this year.
A pretty bad year, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a bad year
all around.
But at the same time, there were a number of those that had we been more on top of it, or been there a couple days earlier, we could have preserved them. You know, so it doesn't matter how much you know. You're never going to know what you don't know. You know what I mean? So, I always tell people, learn as much as you can, read as much as you can, but get started. You don't know what to look for when you're trying to determine if it's healthy brood. You're not going to learn that in a book. It's going to take getting your hands on it, looking in, seeing, okay, I see that, I see an egg, I see this brood pattern. It's not going to tell it's yours that you understand it and it works, So I just want to encourage people, say it's not that tough. There are ways to get into it that are economically viable. And, the other thing is the bees need it. We talk about 80% of insect pollination is done by honeybees. There's another quote that Albert Einstein, and this was obviously a while ago and things have changed, but Albert Einstein said, if the honeybees were wiped from the face of the earth, the human race wouldn't last 4 years.
I've heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And there's big, seed and pesticide companies that would tell you, oh no, that was a long time ago and now we've got advanced whatever, but they're vital to our survival. And, having one or two hives in your backyard makes a difference.
Definitely. Have you also, what about I noticed that you were showing, and also you told us, and I didn't know, but the honeybees aren't local here. What about carpenter bees? What's kind of maybe the trade-off to maybe honeybees and carpenter bees?
I wish I could speak to that. I'm a honeybee guy, and I have been from the beginning. So I really, I know they don't produce honey. So, and that's one of the big draws for us as well, is the honey part of it. So I couldn't really comment on it.
No worries. I guess another question I had was just wondering how it is that you kind of got started, basically.
Yeah, my grandfather was a beekeeper. He was actually an engineer at Boeing. He was a school teacher, an engineer, and that was an area where you did that. You kind of made do with what you had. But he started keeping bees when he was young. It ended up turning into a family business. My dad worked at it when he was young and helped put himself through graduate school working the bees, and So just being around that, always having 5-gallon pails of honey in the closet, you know. Then I moved out on my own. I was like, wow, honey's expensive, man. So, but really kind of for Liddell's Honey and Supply starting this business, my older brother and I both have sons that are 9 and 10. Mm-hmm. And we thought, what a great opportunity to introduce them to it, to give them an opportunity to do some good physical labor in the summers, and then from the profits of the honey sales to be able to save money for college and some of those things.
Yeah.
So, for me, it was kind of a natural evolution, having had, you know, my father and my grandfather in beekeeping. So,
Definitely.
But I've always been fascinated by, you know, if you think of all of the insects in the world, it's the only one that produces something that humans consume.
Yeah.
You know, and there are a number of beneficial insects, but I don't know that there's another insect that is so closely tied in with survival and success of the human race. Mm-hmm. So that's always been a little intriguing.
Yeah, there's really close relationship.
You know,
It interests me that the things that bees are attracted to are the same things humans like. Like flies like to pollinate things that smell nasty, but bees
Right.
also like the same things.
Yeah, and I mean the honeybee. You can study the honeybee for ages, and you're going to learn something new all the time.
Yeah.
You know? And just the way the organization. I mean, everything has a place and a purpose. There isn't. I mean, they're one of the most efficient creatures on the earth. And it's just, you look at how they build things, the structure of them. You know, architects that study that thing. I mean, we're learning from the honeybees. You know. It's just kinda neat.
I think you definitely, like you said, it's like one of the great mysteries still is like in the honeybee, and or like when we were talking about, when I asked the question of royal jelly, you're like, that is one of the great mysteries of like, what is that extra gland, like what's the difference between them, and things that we never know. And it's like, because it's also because they're such a fragile insect that like it's hard to answer those questions because it's an environment.
Well, and when you originally asked the question about royal jelly, I had understood the question to mean like, how do you produce it, almost as if we could commercially manufacture it. And when your question was more about harvesting, and I didn't get that. But so that's it's one of the mysteries. You know, if we could, I mean, royal jelly, I've heard the medicinal value of it is just astronomical.
Yeah, I've heard only a little bit about it, but
so it's pretty incredible stuff. But how exactly do they do it? I mean, people may know, scientists may know. That's not something that I've logged into the Rolodex yet. So.
One thing that like I was just thinking of, just because I work with cameras and stuff, was just like ideas of like how to incorporate ways of like being able to view a hive without having to like interrupt it. And it made me think of like cameras somehow inserted into a hive, but then